We're just waiting for a few more people to come in and we'll get started in about 30 seconds. Thank you all for coming and welcome to Gray Associates Demand for Higher Education Programs for Community Colleges. Today, we're going to be going over results through July of this year. A few housekeeping items just to get started. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A that's at the bottom of your screen. And there's also a chat option as well if you want to chat. We will try to get to as many questions as we can, but if we do run out of time, we are more than happy to follow up with you offline. So in addition to at the end of the presentation, we're going to go live in our systems, and that will help you if you have any questions, if you have any programs that you would like us to take a look at, we'd be happy to give you some more information and show you some of the data on those programs. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our CEO, our founder of Gray Associates, Mr. Bob Atkins.
Thank you very much. And welcome everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar. And today we're going to be focused on community colleges and the data that we have on demand for higher education programs. So it'll give you a sense of whether things are finally getting better after COVID. And if so, where and how, which programs are hot and which are not. So for those of you who don't know Gray, let me start with a brief introduction of the firm. The main thing you need to know about Gray is we offer a complete program evaluation system. In fact, I think we offer the only program evaluation system. Sometimes people think labor market data is a program evaluation system. It's really not. It's a component of one. We would slot it under markets among 3 or 4 other kinds of data that you'd want to have on your market, like competition and student demand. So it's an important reference point, especially for community colleges, but it's far from the only thing you need to think about. In addition to labor and markets, you need to understand your margins and where you're making money and losing money so that you can be sure you keep the overall portfolio in balance. And your high-producing programs can subsidize your low-producing programs and keep the school in sound financial shape. Then we have academic standards you need to take into account, and particularly how they may affect or reflect the state of DEI in your campus. And so how is a given community doing in terms of both its entrance into the college in the first place, and then its ability to matriculate and graduate. And finally, mission. For each program, you need to understand how it's related to your mission, if it's related to your mission, and what it needs to do to stay aligned and how it needs to develop. Now, last but not least, by far, is when you do program evaluation, the system is more than just a piece of software. The system is actually the software, the data, and then the people and process you wrap around it to create the ability to evaluate your programs in a sound way. So let's start off a little bit of a track into Google data. We pull data from Google on search volumes. We do it every month. And we cover 900 of the programs in iPads. That's well over 90% of all completions in the US. So it's a very robust representative data set, although it's not absolutely complete. And what we do is share the data back. You can see the dark blue bars are 2021, the light blue bars are 2022, and we do that monthly. So what do we find out? Well, things are finally looking up. Google search volume is actually up 17% year over year this month, and it's been up every month so far since March. So very encouraging sign that we're finally seeing a turn in the corner in terms of interest in going back to college. What's hot? Well, healthcare is hot. Culinary made our list as well, and then a handful of other things. So you can see on healthcare, we've got the number 1 program in terms of Google search volume was nursing assistant. And then we have licensed practical nurse, phlebotomy tech, medical clinical assistant, and EMT paramedic. So a very strong showing for healthcare programs across the board. Then we look at a couple of other fields, cosmetology. You'll see that come up on several of the later lists. A truck and bus driver, very large program, a lot of interest. and real estate. Now, let me take a moment on truck and bus driving because it's been one of the ones I've paid attention to over the years. Many of you may have this program already. For those of you who don't, I think everyone is now aware that we have a horrible logistics problem in the United States. A good chunk of the problem goes back to not having enough truck drivers. At some point, technology is going to solve this problem with the automation of truck driving, but I'm not sure how far away that is. I think we're at least 5 to 10 years out before there's the need for truck drivers declines. And it's actually a relatively inexpensive program to set up. All you need to do is have a parking lot and lease some trucks. So there's not even a significant capital expense, and run well, it's quite profitable. So it'll contribute to the rest of the institution. Of course, it's relatively short, and the money comes from workforce programs. So it's a little bit different and therefore trickier than a traditional Title IV program. You actually be dealing with a workforce department typically to get funds for that. Now, what are our fastest growing programs? Here, we can see culinary took 2 of the top 10 slots, culinary and culinary arts, and then culinary arts chef training. We've got a bunch of cats and dogs. That's probably a bad metaphor, but aircraft maintenance, science and firefighting, electrician, cosmetology, all in our top group. And then, of course, we have healthcare. Medical assistant grew substantially. Medical billing and coding was up. Rad tech and surge tech, all up over 30%. So there are opportunities for growth now at the associate level and below. And actually, there's some areas that are growing quite rapidly. Now let's take a look at this and say, okay, if Google is really the leading edge where people are still searching, they're certainly not in school yet. Enrollment's the next stage in the funnel. And enrollment has finally turned the corner. This has been a really big crisis for community colleges across the country as enrollments declined. So, here you can see it's finally turned, the tide has turned, and it actually was up 3% in fall 2021. And I think we're seeing, again, finally, a bounce back from COVID. I know that this increase is not evenly distributed. I've talked to a number of clients who are still seeing declines post-COVID, but nonetheless, nationally, we're finally seeing an uptick. And given the Google data, I would expect that to continue. So who enrolled in what? Well, these are all the biggest programs, as you might imagine. Business leading by a long shot with 35,000 new students enrolled. Registered nursing coming in second with almost 10,000 new enrollments. And psychology with 8,000. And then it's interesting, a couple of biologies here, biological science and biological and physical sciences, each with over 5,000 new enrolls. Computer science makes the top, and we have criminal justice with 2 slots here, criminal justice and corrections, and criminal justice police science, again, both over 5,000 new enrolls. We have a few brave souls who went into engineering with 3,500 enrollments this year. What's growing fastest? Well, in this sector for associates programs, cybersecurity is by far the fastest growing individual program in terms of enrollment, up 14%. Pre-engineering was up 4%. Psych was up 2%. Then we have 3 more computer science IT related courses, each up 1%, computer programming, computer science, and information technology. And I think there's a little bit of cannibalization going in across the various computer and coding fields, with students coming out of some of those and going into cybersecurity. Then we have sort of miscellaneous down here at the bottom, business administration, some health services, radiographer, also in healthcare, and bookkeeping. Among things at the programs below the associate level or certificates, welding led the pack with 4,119 new enrollments. The trades did really well here. We had HVAC with 2,300, auto mechanics with 2,000, and electrician with 1,500. And then there's healthcare again, medical clinical assistant, dental assistant, licensed vocational nurse, EMT, paramedic, and medical billing and coding. So in terms of size, your program size based on enrollment, really it's about healthcare, and then it's about trades. Excuse me, let me just go back there a second. I may have misspoken. All right, let's turn to employment. Job postings for associates and certificates is very different from enrollment. Job postings are down 54% year over year. Now, they also drop month over month, which is worrisome because it means the trend is not only the big bounce that happened last year as people came back from COVID and started hiring, but actually on a more normalized basis that the rate of growth in employment is starting to shrink. Again, month over month, 4 out of the last 5 months, the number of job postings declined. Now, that's the doom and gloom. The good news is that it's still 13% higher than March 2020, which is the last period just before COVID. So we're still up compared to what I would call a more normal job environment. What did people need? They needed a lot of healthcare. I think we're seeing this across the country. Having had back spasms yesterday and ended up in the emergency room for a couple hours, and was very fortunate because there are people who have been there for 6 or 7 hours. The situation in our healthcare system is really pretty calamitous. There's a huge need for nurses, nursing assistants, critical care workers, clinical nurse specialists, LPNs, and surge techs, really across the board need for healthcare support. And it is beginning to take a toll, I think, in hospitals and other places where they've just been shorthanded for months and months and had to deal with such a grave crisis and then walk into quote unquote normal with too few people. There are some other things that were growing in that were very large in job postings: new account clerks, maintenance workers, executive administrative assistants, and bookkeeping and accounting clerks. If we look at job postings, year-over-year growth, the smallest drop, and this is for associate certificate holders, the smallest drop here was for nursing assistants. Surge techs took a 29% hit. Clinical nurse specialists and critical care nurses down 38 and 39%. Registered nurses down 43%. Now, you may think this is inconsistent. If we go back to the prior chart, we still have a huge volume of postings for registered nurses, but that's way fewer than we had a few months ago. So it's beginning to ease up a little bit, though I think we're still well short of having enough nurses to fill the available slots. Non-degree courses. So now we're going to turn to the MOOCs, massively online open curriculum or courses. And here, it's really a way of keeping track of what's happening in that non-degree sector. All the sorts of things you might want to offer in, for example, an adult ed program for people who are already in the workforce in most cases, trying to learn a new skill. Apparently, one of the skills we really need to work on is feeling good about ourselves. Science of well-being is #1 on the list, as it has been for quite some time in terms of cumulative enrollment. And if we look at the fastest cumulative enrollment change, that is growth month over by month, it still remains up in the top. Let's see, where did that go off to? The science of well-being comes in 3rd in terms of growth. So lots of people interested in this. I don't know to what extent all of you are teaching it, but it is a hot space and has been for a while. Then, frankly, on the MOOCs, we get into a lot of tech, learning how to learn, Python, where are we? Tech support fundamentals, and neural networks and deep learning. Languages crop up here, which surprised me. First step Korean, English for career development, and Chinese for beginners. And that always surprises me because the language programs at most of the institutions I work with have been in decline for some time. But apparently part of the problem may be that people are looking elsewhere to get that training. And then we have, again, sort of a mix of other things going on, financial markets, negotiation, and technical support fundamentals. The growth is all in tech. Data everywhere, project management, foundations of user design, programming for everybody, tech support fundamentals. 5 out of the 10 here are actually tech related. And then again, sort of a smattering of different things: the science of well-being, English, learning how to learn, and financial markets. What skills are people looking for? And here on the left-hand side, we have the skills required in the IBM Data Analyst Professional Certificate. And those are very similar to the skills that we find in high demand in our job posting database. They include data analysis, SQL, Python, data collection, data mining, and of course, data dashboards. Now let's switch over to Udemy. If anything, this particular source tends to be even more tech related. Here we see web development, programming languages, IT soft certifications, network security, Microsoft data science, all taking slots in the top 15. Then language learning kicks in. And if we go a little bit further down, you get more tech, mobile development, design tools, database design and development. A little bit of finance. We have finance in general, and then we have investing and trading as well. So on this site, as I say, almost all about financing, and there are a handful of other things represented. In terms of what's growing fast, it's really a very similar picture with a heavy emphasis on tech. But we see business coming in here, and particularly business analytics, which if you dig into business analytics is a heavy tech component. There's often coding required to do that well. But other than that, it's and language learning, management, personal transformation are some of the non-tech things, but by and large, this list is dominated in terms of the fastest growth by people wanting to get tech certificates. Now let's take a look at the program of the month. We've picked one out for you we thought would be interesting, and I'll walk you through it, and hopefully that's a help to you in thinking about two things really. One is, how do I analyze a program to see if it's good? And two, is this particular one of interest? So I mentioned the program evaluation system. What we're going to focus on today is one aspect of that, which is the market data. So we'll cover student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit. We have the ability, and it's very helpful when you're doing program analysis, to be able to compare one program to another. In our case, for over 1,400 programs listed in iPads. And that allows you to see not just whether a program's good, but whether it's better than other alternatives you may have, or may lag behind others. And this is one of the problems we really see often in program analytics, is people try to analyze one program at a time. And even if they get that right, and that's difficult, they still don't know how that program compares to other alternatives a school could have pursued. So they may know that it's a good program, but they have no way of knowing if it's the best program. And often the difference between good and best is like a multiple of 10. So it's very important when you're doing this work to be able to see more than just the individual program you're looking at, but to see how it compares with other alternatives you may have. Now, you're probably not in the position to do what we do and track all 1,400 programs. When you're doing this at home, you have a couple of options for how you do these comparisons and scoring that leads to this sort of percentiling. One is to just pick a program you know well and compare a potential new program to that program. Or for that matter, compare your existing programs to that one sort of benchmark program to see how well they do on each metric in comparison one to another. So you have a baseline that you really know and understand, and you can then see how that compares to other programs. The other alternative is to do all the programs that you currently have and benchmark against that. So there's a couple different ways to get at this. And depending on your resources, if you're very resource constrained, then you do one program and set that as a benchmark. If you're not so constrained, then you can take any new program and compare it to all your current programs on similar data. And since we have to do this over and over again, we've been able to compile a data set. We are allowed to compare or enabled to compare one program with all the other programs out there that you may be able to offer. Construction trades here, you can see we've got in dark green for the total. It's at 99th percentile. That means it's in the top 1% of our 1,400 programs, or among the 15 most attractive programs on this scoring system. Student demand, not quite as strong at the 98th percentile, but that's still extremely good, one of the top 28. Competitive intensity is where this one really starts to take a hit. It's at 38th percentile, so they're 62% of our programs have less competition. But employment's also very strong at the 94th percentile. So we've got a program here that hits on 3 out of 4 very, very well. And then importantly, it does very well in degree fit. It's an appropriate program to offer at the associate's level or below. Now, you'll notice we did color code everything there. That we do throughout so that people like me who are history majors can look at stacks of data and interpret it relatively quickly. Green here is good, red is bad. So it's a very easy way to look at a sheet and understand what's going on with the numbers without having to comb through each one. When we turn to student demand for this program, what we find is that the Google search volume is very healthy. 600,580 Google searches in the trailing 3 months for this program. That puts it the 98th percentile. So it's among the 2% of programs that are being most sought after through Google, which is a pretty encouraging sign. Enrollment, not as high, actually. We're only at the 85th percentile in enrollment, and a little bit disappointing there. It's possible that enrollment's a little bit more of a lagging indicator than Google search volume. So it's possible that the trend is moving up and that the enrollment will increase in the future. But at this point, that's more of a guess than a certainty. But that may explain why there's a gap between these two. We look at completions now. We're talking about very trailing information. These are the people who picked their programs back in 2018 and are now graduating. Now, I say 2018, that's because the most current data on completions from iPads is 2020. And they made their decision on what program to take 2 to 4 years before that when they enrolled or picked their major. So, the iPads data tends to be very old. For those of you who have their ears to the ground, the newest iPads data was released yesterday, I believe, and we'll be rolling that into our systems over the next 2 or 3 months. Takes a little bit of time to run it through all the different gymnastics we do to make it, to bring it down to a program level. And we have to do some cleanup as well, the normal kind of noise that occurs in iPads. But there will be more current data available from iPads. But even when it's more up to date, it's still that'll be 2021 spring. And we're still looking at what people wanted back in 2018. So when you want current data, you need to look at Google search or enrollment. And now let's look at growth. And the growth here is very attractive as well. You can see we're up almost 100,000 units in Google search volume. That's a 19% increase. New student enrollment was up 24%, and completion volume was up 13%. So all in all, this is big and it's growing. Now, there are jobs. Interesting question. And by the way, remember, very unrelated to how many students there are. Oftentimes, there'll be a lot of students who want to take something with relatively few jobs. Think crime scene investigator. That used to be a hot program until everybody realized that when people graduated, they couldn't get a job at all. So that finally melted away. But there is a difference between what students want and what employers want. And you'll often see them out of balance. Here we can see that job postings are 77th percentile, and BLS current employment, that's the total number of people employed in the field, is about 220,000. And BLS would assert that there are 21,200 job openings, but they base that in part on their forecast of growth. And unfortunately, their forecast is not very good. 80% of their forecasts are off by 50% or more. So when you want to know what's happening in the employment world, unfortunately, that's not very helpful. And that also gets into the job openings data. So my personal preferred number is job postings and the trend in job postings, if I'm trying to understand how many jobs there may be available and how that's trending. We are seeing, actually, interesting enough, a slight decline in the number of jobs at BLS. And I should put a caveat here. The total number of jobs from BLS is actually a pretty good number. It's just the forecast that gets screwed up. And then that ripples into the way they calculate job openings, which undermines the integrity of that number. But the absolute number of people employed is a good number, as good as you can get. And we can see that there's a lot of demand for these folks relative to the supply. There are 3.9 job openings per graduate. And if we look at BLS, job postings per graduate. And if we look at the BLS job openings per graduate, we're up to 8.5. So both of those would suggest that this is a pretty high demand program relative to the number of people taking the courses. Wages, however, are not so great. The 10th percentile wage in this area is $37,000, and the mean is $57,000. That's sort of a mid-career number. So it's not a very high paid field, although I think that's because it's mixing two things. One is people who are doing the hands-on work in construction, and the other is more construction management. And you can't tease those apart very easily with the data. So what's going on in terms of trends in job postings? The trend is actually down a little bit. And this comes out of one of our systems where we keep track of job postings on a standalone basis. And you can see that it's down this month by 8%. It's actually up in June, but down a little bit in May, down in April, down in March, down in February versus last year. But lest you take away a negative impression, look at the gap between 2020, 2021, and 2022. We are nowhere near the level of job postings that existed back in March 2020, easily double. April, approximately double. May, double. June, more than double. And July, we're well more than double the job postings for people in construction trades in 2020. So while it's down a little bit off the very high number of job postings in 2021, still a very robust demand for folks in these trades in the workplace. First line supervision. So in construction, what did they want? And the first was first line supervisors. I can attest to this. This is an area my son works in, and they're having a hell of a time getting competent people. And we're not talking about rocket science here. The trick was, can you measure the number of inches from the side of a footing, a concrete footing, and from the top, and get the answer right? Turns out to be pretty important when you're going to try and put a pipe through that fitting, that you put it in the right place. He has yet to find anybody that works for him that can do that. So he's been out and forced to go back out and measure the stuff himself, even though he's actually a superintendent for the whole job site. So there's a real need here for people that can do the work. The work is at the beginning, not super sophisticated, but terribly important. Once you put in a concrete footing, it's kind of hard to move it. So we also need electricians, building inspectors, plumbers, carpenters, construction carpenters. And then we get to things that are a little bit less frequent, pipe fitters, solar plumbers and steam fitters, and that's for the pipes as opposed to the rest of the plumbing, and structural iron and steel workers. So we're looking at pretty fundamental big building kinds of stuff, the structural iron and steel, the plumbers and pipe fitters, being in a couple different places here. So that's, if you will, a heavy metal of building. What skill do they need? Maintenance is interesting to see here. I find I'll come back to that. Plumbing, technician, welding, carpentry, construction management, circuit breakers, which is really electrician, electrical skill, building engineering, repairing, and flooring. And I said I'd come back because one of the programs I think has been missed really in the community college sector is building maintenance. And it may be related to building engineering. That could have a couple meanings, but we used to have a guy when I worked in retail that was responsible for all of the infrastructure inside the building, whether that was the air conditioning, the lighting, the painting, minor plumbing repairs, and so forth. So those guys are kind of hard to find because they needed to be a jack of all trades. They needed to know a little about HVAC. They needed to know enough about electrical, not to blow the circuits out when they change the lights and so forth, not to mention knowing some plumbing. And the job pays pretty well. I think it could be done very well by a community college, but it's not a program that I've seen very frequently in my travels at, I don't know, a few dozen community colleges so far. So just a thought for all of you. And finally, let's look at competition. Well, almost finally. On competition, this is not so great. There's 71 campuses in this market that offer the program, which puts it at the 88th percentile. So in the 12% of the most competitive markets, most competitive programs, I should say. There are 4 particular schools in this area, and the average program completions are 36, which that gets me pretty excited when I see that. You can see it's a 94th percentile, and that means they're going to be 2 to 4 times as many students as that in the program. So this would have 100 students approximately at a typical community college. But that appears to be way overstated. Typically, that means that there's 1 or 2 competitors who have a huge number of completions. And then you can see the median is only 6, which makes it a little bit risky. That would mean there are only really 15 to 20 students in the entire program who are working their way through to completion. So it'd be a risky program to start up because your average class size is going to be pretty small. And that may mean that there's too much competition. It could also mean we're just not doing a good job. The student demand appears to be here, but we're not doing a good job of recruiting those students and getting them to come to college, which with a strong labor market is an increasingly difficult challenge. And then we can see another issue, which is that the year-over-year completions in this program are dropping from 8 to 6 down 2. That's a 33% drop. So the people who are already in this space are having trouble filling their classes. So while student demand is good and jobs are good, the competition here looks pretty intense. And unless you're good at competing, you've got good marketing, good admissions folks, it might be a difficult program to enter. Last but not least, degree fit. This is the question of whether the program we're looking at is appropriate for a given degree level. So we don't want to create neurosurgeons or give degrees in neurosurgery at the associate's level. And similarly, we're not going to want to give a PhD for house painting. So we do some metrics to try and understand what is the appropriate level. And it does look as though this is a certificate. If you look at completions nationwide, it's predominantly a certificate program and a smattering of associates. So it's a very good, it's dead center for a community college. And we look at what the award levels are for people who are actually working. A heavy slug of no college. Again, this is mixing in construction management with the hands-on work at the site, and some college at 25%, but not a lot of folks doing in the workforce who have degrees. And then who's in this program? So one of the things we like to all of you to consider is that as you pick programs and adjust your program portfolio, it does have an impact on the ethnicity and gender of the people on your campus. In other words, it's going to affect the diversity of the campus. People often forget that, and they make program decisions without considering whether today most campuses are approximately 60% women, as an example. If you add another healthcare program, you're pretty much going to be attracting women in most of those fields, not all, but nursing would be the stereotype at almost 90% female still. No good reason why men couldn't do that, but they don't. And so as you pick programs, you got to make sure that you're engineering, if you will, the population on campus in a way that you'll be more diverse, or at least as diverse as you are now in the future. And if you tend to pick programs that appeal to one demographic or another, that could amplify inequities on your campus or begin to dampen them to the extent you pick programs that bring in students who are you're in the more privileged groups, if you will. Now, in this particular one, it's way overrepresented by men. Do remember that that's not the average on campus. The average is 60-40 men to women to men. So almost 50% more women than men on campus. So in that sense, this might be an interesting program to launch because it would tend to attract men who might not otherwise go to college. It's not going to attract a whole lot of women for whatever reason. And then it trends from Asian to white, 2 or more races. Interestingly, this program is not appealing very well to other minority communities, Hispanic, Black, and other. And here I'm just going to dwell for a minute. This is the total. So you can, on one page, see all the data that you could bring to bear to inform a program decision. And the total score here is 34, and that gets at the 99th percentile. And then you can, at a glance, interpret the page. So the overall is dark green, so it's in the top 2%. Student demand is dark green, top 2%. Employment, light green, 94th percentile. And very quickly, my eye goes down to competitive intensity, and I say, oh, here I've got a problem. Almost everything around competition is pink. So again, good student demand, good employment, really tough competition. So it may not be something you want to get into. Again, depends how good you are competing. Let me summarize. First, it's very important to recognize that good data actually exists out there to inform your program decisions and help you find growth opportunities. You don't have to do guesswork. There's real information that can help you make these choices so that your odds of success increase. The data is boding well for enrollment right now. Google search was up 17% year over year, and enrollment actually grew 3%. So I think if anything, I would expect things to get better than 3% enrollment growth as we move forward. What's growing? Well, dental assistant led our list. At the associate level, cybersecurity grew the fastest, and I think that's still got legs, still an enormous problem without enough people to help solve it. Healthcare has several of the largest and fastest growing programs, led by nursing. Job postings suggest that the labor market is cooling, however. Year over year, they fell 54%. They've declined 4 of the last 5 months, but they remain well above what I would call normal pre-COVID levels. So while the trend is down, we're still in a very healthy place in terms of volume of jobs for certificate and associate's degree graduates. In July, registered nursing and nursing assistant had the highest volume of job postings as we try and refill those healthcare jobs in our society. And demand for programs in construction trades is high, but so is the supply, that is the competition. And the employment prospects are still good. So it is a really interesting one here of whether there's a way to go after this that would allow you to take share in this segment despite the competition. And graduates of programs with associates and bachelor's degrees are looking at pretty good space. Sorry, this is for construction trades with a $57,000 mean wage. That wraps it for this webinar. We've got a few more upcoming for you. We have a boot camp on management implementation of academic program evaluation systems. That's going to run Thursday. That will be tomorrow, everyone, 2 to 3. We've got a demand trends webcast. If you're interested in looking at bachelor's and above, that'll be tomorrow as well at 4. And then we'll continue to run our community college webcast on the Wednesday, the 28th of September, and our demand trends webcast for bachelor's is the 29th of September. And before we part, let me suggest to all of you that if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of our book, Stop, Start, or Grow, and you're trying to figure out how to evaluate programs, please feel free to grab a copy. It's available on Amazon, and it's gotten very favorable reviews, including Paul LeBlanc yesterday, the leader of SNHU, suggesting it's a good handbook for you as you go into the program evaluation process. Thanks, and we're going to throw open the floor now. If there are questions you have, or if you'd like to see a particular program, we've just been joined by Wanel, and he would be glad to walk you through.
Hello, hello.
Any questions, comments, or programs that you'd like to look at? Okay, if not, I'm going to declare victory and ask you all to complete a very short survey, one or two questions, and we'll be off. And if you do think of other questions after the webinar, please feel free to join us or send them to me, and we'll be glad to answer them. My email, if you need it, is you see the robertgrayatkins.com. That will work. Or you can contact me at my regular work number or email, which is bob.atkins@grayassociates.com. Thanks, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again next month.